Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Ed Keck. I'm the partner and practice leader for Withum's Cyber and Information Security practice. Along with me today, we have Julie Tracy, who is an executive advisor and a member of the practice. Today, we're going to talk about cybersecurity and getting back to basics for a stronger business security posture. First, we're going to talk about some of the trends that we're seeing in cyber and information security. And then we're going to talk about how to protect your organization, leveraging those basic elements of cybersecurity and really getting back to the basic blocking and tackling of security and moving as you move forward. So could we go to the next slide, please? So why does cybersecurity matter? First of all, cybersecurity is an issue for every business, regardless of your size. Wherever there's information that can be leveraged for personal gain or for economic gain, hackers are trying to get to it. In 93% of the cases, an external hacker can breach an organization's network and gain access to their local environment. Credential compromise, your ID, your passwords, is the main route attackers use to get inside. And we often see, in fact, 71% of the time, we see that this is the primary method to get in. However, 60% of breaches involve unpatched systems. 23% of them are the result of human error. 43% of cyber attacks are targeted at small businesses. And the average cost of a data breach today is $4.2 million, up 10% over the previous year. Think about this. If you're a small business, you're seeing a disproportionate amount of the attacks coming your way. Human error is a factor. How many of you have reused a password or have put your credentials in a spot where they could be discovered? And can your business really afford a $4.2 million direct hit to their bottom line, an additional expense that you didn't anticipate for this year? And that $4.2 million is significant because ransomware attacks that we'll talk about during this conversation are up, and the ransoms that are being demanded are astronomical. So what are the most common attacks that we've seen in 2023? We just mentioned ransomware, and it continues to be the most common attack, increasing by 13% from Q1 to Q2 of this year. Social engineering remains highly effective. It's accounting for about 43% of successful attacks against organizations and 93% of the attacks that are targeted against individuals. There's been an increase in attacks on web resources, rising from 17% of the total cyber incidents in 2021 to 22% in 2023. Think of your cloud environments. Think of all the things you do on the web today. Those are now accounting for more and more of the cyber attacks. Those are areas that are potentially outside of your control. You're trusting someone else to provide you with security. But you need to know, are they doing the right thing? That ransomware number. Go ahead, Julie.
So would this include things like your Office 365 and things of that nature?
Absolutely. As businesses move to the cloud, more and more those cloud resources are being targeted. And just like having an internal environment that isn't configured correctly, if you don't configure your cloud environment correctly, it can be vulnerable as well. You still have to have backups. Just because you move to the cloud, don't assume that your data is secure or that your data has been replicated. You still need backups. You still need to have your data in multiple places. You still need to be able to recover in the event of one of these breaches or in the event of a disaster. Those are all things that organizations should be looking at to make sure that their configuration is correct. I want to talk just for a minute about social engineering, because everyone thinks that social engineering, oh, they can spot that, right? I'm sure Julie can tell stories like I can about the emails that would come, and they would have very poor grammar in them, or they would refer to your your former or your relative who's passed away with a large sum of money that they want to send you. If you could just send them $500 to get it to you, right? Um, this social engineering is not like that. These emails are very sophisticated. Very often, when you look at the domain names and the URLs, they look perfect. They may change the character set. So when you read it, it looks exactly like it should. But on the back end to the computer, it's completely different. Because remember, the computer is looking at ones and zeros. So a Cyrillic character is different than a standard Latin or English character. It may look the same to you or very, very similar. So when you read it, you don't notice a difference, but it reroutes you to a different domain, a different URL, and that's where the hacker is able to get access. The poor grammar is gone. These emails are very polished. They're very well written. It's very difficult to discern the difference between a bad email and a good email very often. You have to maintain your diligence around educating your people and around having the right controls in place to scan your email systems. Next slide, please. So 90% of businesses report that they're confident that they've implemented the best practices to prevent or mitigate cyber events. However, as you see in the remaining statistics that are on this page, most of them have not implemented even basic prevention measures. So 25% have not implemented the most basic practices such as firewalls, virus or malware protection, have data backups, or even do password updates. 64% don't use endpoint detection and response. So they're not monitoring what goes on their workstations and their laptops, nor do they have the ability to respond to what's going on those devices. 65% don't have a post-breach team on retainer as part of an incident response plan. So if there is an incident, who are you going to call? Who's going to be there to help you respond? And 44% don't use multi-factor authentication at all. So these are just some of the basic things that 90% of the organizations say we've got it covered. Yet when you look at that 90%, most of them don't. They don't even have basic security in place. There's huge holes in their environment that could allow hackers to get in. They're kind of secure just by luck. Maybe they haven't been targeted yet, or maybe they have been and they just don't know it. Next slide. So Julie, maybe you could take us through kind of what businesses could do to help prevent some of the issues that we just talked about, and to kind of get on the right side of the security spectrum here.
Absolutely. One of the first things that we like to recommend as we talk with clients is creating that culture of cybersecurity from the top down. So as business leaders, you want to set that model for every employee within the organization that cybersecurity is a top priority here, and that we will implement the appropriate controls to make sure that we have everything in place as an organization to keep us safe. So that means as the CEO, the CFO, anyone in the C-suite, senior management and whatnot, that they are examples of what should be done. So for example, I'll use the CIO for an example. day to day, his daily, as you would your daily drive car, this is your daily drive user account that you have that you use to do everything, doesn't have admin privileges, that those administrative those extra privileges that you would have to do things on the network or in your cloud environment are reserved for a special account that you only use when you need to do that. And so setting that example in that, sometimes we deal with business owners who want to have access to everything, and helping them understand why that's important to not have access to everything, and limiting that, and making sure that that's something as a culture from the top down, like I said, that everyone in the organization adheres to. You also want to create a written information security program. And a lot of people bristle at this idea, but this is so important. I'm going to use football as an example. So in this, you have your playbook. That's what your information security program is. It's your playbook. It's your script. If you're in theater, it's telling you what to do in what circumstance. And it's not specific. It deals with a lot of times generality. Procedures are where you get very specific, but that playbook is so vitally important, because then everybody's running on the same play or using the same script. And so we can all work together towards that common goal that's so important. And so in these policies, you'll have things like, we require backup. We require multi-factor authentication. It doesn't specify what product you may use for that. That would come in a more procedural type statement. But what it does say is, our organization says we will have these things in place. These are the consequences if we don't. And if we have an exception, but we have a written exception on why we don't have that in place, and that you review that on an annual basis to make sure that if an exception exists, maybe there's a new control that you can have in place to alleviate that exception the next time. Next slide, please. So these are areas, these we call basic blocking and tackling in our industry. There's things that we consider to be very straightforward, but a lot of times these get left behind because everyone's busy. Everyone has multiple hats maybe that they wear within the organization. So one of the most important things, and this actually will reduce your attack surface tremendously, is to keep your systems patched and up to date. And what that means, running Windows Update, and it's not just Windows Update. We'll talk to folks about this and they'll say, well, I've got Windows Updates running and configured. Oh, have you confirmed that every update is supposed to be installed? That you didn't miss one. And there are updates outside of just Windows. Maybe you're running a Mac. There's certainly software that you run on your system. And so you want to make sure that the software you run is updated as well. And it's not just software, operating systems. You'll have other things that you have within your networking environment. You'll have things like firewalls. You want to make sure that if there are any updates that need to be applied to that those are in place. Switches, printers, wireless, all of that stuff, that you keep it up to date. Your cell phone. If you are accessing business systems on a mobile device, you want to make sure that those devices are updated as well. So it's really easy when you think about all of the moving parts as it comes to patching systems, that you have something that allows you to put your hands around every piece of equipment. And so you may have something that will allow you to patch everything, that will actually then run audit reports to make sure that things that are patched as you within Windows updates or other things, that it will pull everything together and make sure that everything is patched and patched in a timely manner. We also want to implement endpoint detection and response. Going back to the slides that Ed was talking about, the 64% of organizations aren't doing this. And this is something, again, that's so easy. It's something that you can put on every machine within your environment. You want to make sure that it's properly configured, that it's looking for the right things, and that you have alerts set up. So if there is something that's going on, that you have the ability to detect it and then respond to it. And when you're talking about in a business environment, typically these will allow you to have a management console, typically out in the cloud, that you'll be able to go to and make sure that all of your devices have that there aren't any issues going on with them. It can look through to see if there's any malware that's been detected on them, anything like that. Any kind of unusual activity. If maybe something has been turned off and now all of a sudden it's turned on, it should have an alert. You really should have alerts if software is being installed. And users really shouldn't be installing software. And so you'd want to implement this to be able to detect if somehow they were able to install software, what that was, those kinds of things. So these are going to be, great ways for you to have your hands wrapped around everything that's within your environment to understand what's going on the day-to-day. Next slide, please. Go ahead, Ed.
Julie, you made a couple of really great points here. And I just wanted to tie back. When people think about implementing endpoint detection and response, very often you and I have seen they forget those mobile devices that you were talking about when you were talking about keeping everything patched, right? It's critical for people to use some type of mobile device management, regardless of the size of the organization, right? If someone's using their phone or their tablet to access work data, emails, other forms of information, you really need the ability to keep the work data safe and separate from the personal information. And there's a lot of solutions out there that will allow you to make sure that if I'm using my device for business, it's patched and up to date, and also allow you to manage the business information so that if the device is lost, if I'm no longer with the organization, you can take that information off the device and still leave the personal information behind so that you don't disturb the individual's privacy or the information that they own. And that's one thing that people often overlook, is that mobile device management. And I think that's critical.
I agree. And I think, mobile device management has definitely come a long way from its early inception. I've heard horror stories of people talking about, well, yeah, when I left the organization, the mobile device management completely wiped my phone. I lost 10 years of pictures. And so people for a while were like, oh, I don't want mobile device management because it's going to ruin my personal life. But they have matured. And as Ed said, you can just now isolate just the business portion of that. And so if they separate, if they have that device stolen, you can protect the business information that's there. So that's really going to be important for you as business owners. Next slide, please. So talking about your data and making sure that it's safe, one of the things that you want to do is encrypt your data, and you want to encrypt it at rest. So when it's residing on your device, be it the cloud, be it your mobile device, be it your laptop, desktop, server on premises, whatever that may be. And you also want to encrypt your data in transit. So when you're accessing it from a mobile device to the cloud, laptop to the cloud, coming in, working remotely from home into the office. So you want to make sure that that data then is protected from eavesdroppers who could actually perform different types of attacks, man in the middle, different things like that, and actually be able to see your data as it transmits across the internet. You want to be able to utilize multi-factor authentication whenever possible. Going back to Ed's slide where he was talking about 44% of organizations don't use multi-factor authentication at all. And that's such a great way to help reduce the ability for threat actors to take over your account. In addition to utilizing multi-factor authentication, I think there's also a flip side to that, in that you have to make sure that your users are trained and understand how to use it. And so when there is maybe a push, if they're using something that uses a push notification, if they're not logging into a system and they receive a push notification, that A, they don't approve it, and B, that they let the appropriate people know that, hey, there's someone trying to get into my account. I just got a push notification. I didn't approve that. Or if it's, try and stay away from the SMS stuff. I know it's still out there. Using authenticators is much more secure than SMS. But multi-factor authentication wherever you can, especially on critical systems that have elevated systems where the user has elevated privileges, such an administrator and things of that nature, or that are publicly facing. So your cloud applications, things like that. You really do want to use multi-factor authentication. We kind of talked about designing, or when we talked about creating that culture of cybersecurity within your organization, you want to design your access control around using least privileges. And so what that means is, what do I really need to be able to do my day-to-day job? There will be times when I may need elevated privileges. So you may have a secondary account for that, or you may have maybe just-in-time permissions. So when you need to do something and it's not through the normal course of your day, you can then get elevated permission or access to a different system that you normally wouldn't, through appropriate controls to be able to give you that access. And what that does is, if your account for some reason is compromised, it limits the amount of data and access that an attacker would have if they were able to compromise your account. Next slide, please. You want to secure remote access. We were talking previously about, encrypting that. So that's, if you've got access into the system from working remotely, definitely you want to make sure that that's secured through a VPN and that VPN is encrypted. You want to implement a password policy. So Ed was talking about that 71% of compromises involve credential compromise. And so understanding if you've been the victim of a breach and you have passwords that are out now available on the dark web, that you are not reusing those credentials, that A, when a breach happens, and B, that you then immediately stop using that password. And when we talk about passwords, we could tell lots of stories about people with passwords, people that have a favorite password and want to use that all over the place on every system. So you should have a separate password for every system in which you log in. You shouldn't use passwords from your personal on your business account. If any of those passwords get compromised, you want to be able to have alerts set up that they're actually scanning your information on the dark web. So that if one of your passwords or one of the systems in which you access has been compromised, that you know what that password is and you're able to change it. I know in 2012, and it's obviously been a minute ago, when that LinkedIn breach happened, several high-level executives had their email compromised because they were using the same password for LinkedIn as they were using for their corporate email. And so it's very important to understand why you would not use the same password across multiple systems. A longer password is better. 8 to 12 characters is really no longer the norm. It's 15, 16 to 20, 24 characters now. The longer the password, thinking about password phrases, things like that. And so really making sure that you have a good, strong password policy, that you have mechanisms in place that are looking on the dark web for compromised passwords within your organization. And finally, next, we want to talk about backing up your data. As Ed alluded to, just because you go to the cloud and have migrated your systems to the cloud doesn't negate the fact that you still have to back up your data. And so making sure that you have a backup strategy in place, and not only backing it up, but you want to then do test restores on a regular basis to know, are the backups that I have, are they backing up everything? Can they be restored? And then finally, you want to know how long it takes you to restore that data. If you've got a disaster recovery plan and you say, well, I can be up and running, in 4 hours, but it takes you 24 hours to restore your data, you don't have an accurate plan and you don't have an accurate timeline in which you can get back up and running. So it's going to be important to do all of those elements. Next slide, please. You want to have an incident response policy. So, and then that will have an incident response plan that will tell you, serve as the guideline, again, the playbook on if you have a cyber incident, what you will do. You want to purchase cyber insurance. And I can tell you that everything that we have been talking about previously, the cyber insurance application will ask if you're doing it. And so it's really important that you are doing it. I was recently speaking at a conference, and one of the folks in the audience asked, what if we said yes to everything and we're not doing it? Then your cyber insurance policy will deny your claim. And finally, and this is the last piece, and it's something that you can't do yourself, is you really need to have a cybersecurity professional review your program. And so that's that outside assessment or audit of your systems to make sure that you have everything in place. When you go through it, that's actually probably a requirement within most cybersecurity or cyber insurance policies as well. And it's really important that someone has an objective third-party opinion of what's going on within your program. Do you really have everything in place? Is it effective? Sometimes it could be that you have 20 things that are doing the same thing, and you could actually simplify your program. It's not always a matter of telling you to do more. It could be to streamline things and make everything more efficient. But really having that outside assessment of what's going on within your program is really important. Don't you agree, Ed?
That is absolutely important. Yes. Even if you have, a well-trained team internally, it's always good to have another pair of eyes, just validate things outside without any bias, without any presumed knowledge of the environment, just to make sure you know exactly where you're at. So in conclusion, I just want to say thank you to all of you for joining us today. Julie and I are available if you have any questions, and please don't hesitate to reach out to us.